All right, welcome in. College football talk, May 14th, and we're talking college football. It's going to be a good time. I'm looking forward to it. Joined here by my friend Joshua Nunn, better known as Step on a Duck. This guy knows college football really well, and he's been deeper in this college football prep than I have so far. And I'm going to get some words of wisdom from him as well tonight. We're going to talk about the process, we're going to talk about some of the specifics, but stay tuned. We are going to also follow up on this, do a second part, at least a second part, giving more specifics as far as some teams and things to look for. But today we'll mainly go on, what do you want to do with offseason to prep, to be better prepared? There's so many people that aren't prepared when August rolls around. Now's a better time than to prepare than is August 15th. So here we are in the middle of May. Let's get into this process. Josh, man, it's good to see you. Good to be on here with you. It almost feels like we should have games sooner than what we do since I'm talking with you, but that's good. We're prepping early on. How are you, man?
Doing really well, Kyle. Thanks for having me on tonight. Yeah, it's crazy how quickly the season can creep up on us. We're just 100 short days from kickoff on August 23rd, and off-season prep is in the full swing here. So I'm excited to talk some college football. I'm really itching to get started with this. There's been a lot happening in the off-season, more now than ever, and it's just really fantastic to start the off-season prep and to really get diving into the weeds. To put ourselves in a position to be successful come August. So really excited to have you with me on that and to give our great listeners some valuable nuggets tonight. It's going to be good.
Absolutely, and appreciate you guys who've already jumped in. I see 75 of you already watching since we just kicked off. I think that's pretty solid. Bobby, thanks for being on here. Brent, Hookem. All right, Brent. They should have a good season. We'll get to talk about them more. It should be a fun season for Texas coming up. But thanks, guys, for being on here. And Heisenberg, shout out. Thank you. Yeah, we're gonna try to get some information out there that is kind of evergreen content. This is stuff that you can watch that should be good for a little ways out. Not even necessarily specific to a certain month or a certain season. This is kind of processes that you could kind of repeat in future seasons. We'll talk about the kind of different landscapes that are going on now. Betting college football is definitely different now than it was 10 years ago. And the off season is way different. It's a quicker timeline, certainly the NIL, everything that's going on. Let's start with that. Josh, let's go ahead and jump right into it and talk about a little bit of the massive player movement. G5 teams being rated. I mean, I started looking down through some of these rosters, and listen. I'm a Buckeyes fan. I'm absolutely happy the Buckeyes won it. Really successful, fun run there. But I also really do like the little guy, and I hate seeing the G5 teams. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's gone from here. These teams just being completely rated, some of the very best players. It's almost like if they are super. If they stand out enough they're bound to be somewhere else the next season. At first, what does that, what does that do? The massive player movement, the G5 teams being rated. How does that, what do you think? Just give me an overview of what you think the ever-changing landscape means for bettors.
Yeah, well, first off, sign of the times is the almighty dollar, and the NIL is really just wreaking havoc on the FCS stars and the Group of Five talent. You're seeing that teams are having their star players poached, and even just major contributors that may not be household names, but major contributors are being poached to the Power Four leagues in hopes of signing NIL contracts, which that's been happening. This year, we've had over 3,800 players in the portal as of April 25th when the second window closed, which is a record. And it's about 33 to 35 players per team. So it's just a ton of talent that's changing hands in an ever-shifting landscape with people moving around. And you see all over America not only at the FCS level, but the G5 has been raided. Teams like Jacksonville State, Western Kentucky, Northern Illinois, Charlotte, all of these teams are just decimated with talent. And so what's ended up happening is you have players that are going to the Power Four level that are going to contribute or be in the two deep in some capacity. And then these G5 level teams are having to backfill their roster, and they are pulling from, you have some fringe Power Five players that are moving down, but you have some FCS players that are moving up. The issue that I have with that is that a lot of these G5 teams are not pulling from FCS household names like North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Montana State. They're pulling from Gardner-Webb and Campbell and Furman and Mercer and teams like that. And so you're getting fringe players on the back end. Something to be leery of for sure with the group of five teams is going to be their depth and also how they're backfilling their rosters. What I believe is happening is you're just getting a widened gap between the Power Five and the group of five that's going to be wider than we've ever seen. So something I'm going to hone in on in weeks 1 through 3 specifically is let's take a look at those spreads in the non-conference games between the Power Four leagues and group of five teams. Even solid group of five teams may not have the depth to keep their team within a number that they may not be able to set high enough. So I'm really intrigued to see how those numbers go and how the favorites do in those first 3 weeks of the season, just simply because I believe the gap is wider than ever, and I'm not so sure that the prices are going to reflect that talent disparity, which has happened due to NIL.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that, the ever-changing picture, you have to adapt. If you're not adapting from what you did before, if you're doing exactly the same thing you did 10 or 15 years ago, you're not going to have success the way you did. And I mean, even some of those kind of systems that worked really well for early season probably don't really matter now, given the different landscape of college football. I certainly still like some of the, I love the weather unders, things like that for when it comes to totals. But I think you're right. I think that, remember at the beginning of this, some people said this is going to cause parity. This is going to be really helpful. This is going to be, and even in college basketball, I mean, the number one seeds just all get through there. I mean, that's, it didn't work out to cause that kind of parity. The rich get richer. That's how it's gone. So as bettors, we make adjustments. We try to see, where the books could be a little bit off. I think just ever-changing landscape, be ready to make adjustments. There is no perfect formula for success necessarily, but putting in the work in the off season. And, that's why we want to try to do a show like this. If you're working ahead of time in May, you got a lot better chance of winning in August and September than you do if you just try to get started a week or so ahead of time. So I know Josh here has been putting in a ton of work. I've been putting in a decent amount of work already as well, and it's going to kick up here quite a bit. But I do want to ask you, this is a question I get quite a bit. So I want to get your take on this. What are some of your favorite off-season resources? Because I know a lot of people are saying, look, why don't you wait till such and such magazine comes out? Why don't you wait till, XYZ comes out? Well, yeah, I mean, those are on the stands in July, and you and I follow the season win total market very closely. You might get your hands on something in June, but heck, June 15th is getting kind of late now. I mean, before you would have been the early guy if you bet in June. That's not the case anymore. What are some of your favorites to use in the off season, especially early in the off season? So.
Before we dive into that, there was a couple things that you hit on, which are really important. So with the second portal window closing on April 25th, what happens there is that's after spring practice for many teams and after the spring games have already taken place. And so what happens is you really have to ramp up your off-season prep earlier because so many of these teams and the makeup and complexion of what these teams look like from a personnel standpoint can change in March and April, when in the past that necessarily was not happening. And so we'll get into the off-season resources that I rely on, but I've actually also had to pivot over the last couple of years. It was a general practice of mine to start my off-season prep around the second week of April and really dive into tuning into spring games and shoring up rosters about that time. But I've had to shift that up to about the third week of February, where I'm really diving in, analyzing the portal changes, diving into the spring game and spring practice reports, and really trying to get a kind of a cheat sheet on what these teams are going to look like from a personnel and a scheme standpoint. So I'd recommend anybody really ramp that preseason prep up, just due to the volume of change that we've experienced in the past. When maybe teams would lose 8 to 10 players, maybe 6 of them were not really major contributors. It was easier to kind of keep tabs on the changes and the holes that a team has. But now if you pull up the 2 deep roster for any team, there's possibly 14 different new players on the 2 deep, and you really have to analyze where that talent disparity is, where the holes are, what the position battles are going to look like in fall camp. It's really important to get ahead of that early. So I do a lot of preseason prep starting about the third week of February, and then it really ramps up April 1st. So there's a couple of things that I rely on. I really try to find, if you're not modeling yourself and creating your own power ratings, which I do, find some power ratings that are relatively accurate and up to date at this point. If you look at things like the Sagarin ratings or Massey or some of those, they're just not updated. They're updated through the bowl games, but that means nothing anymore because of the complexity of the changes and what's been happening. So find some power ratings where you can create a baseline. And then from there, I try to dive into numbers such as the returning production and the TARP, where you factor in the transfers and what their production numbers would possibly look like. So there's a kind of a total returning production number for each team. I'm really diving into things like the roster and the transfer portal moves. So 24/7 Sports is a really good one to keep tabs on, team by team, the transfers that have come in, the transfers that are going out. There's a website called ourlads.com, which is a really fantastic website. Our Lads actually has a pretty solid and accurate 2 deep on each team, offense, defense, and special teams contributors as well. So Our Lads can really give you kind of a snapshot as to what these 2 deeps are going to look like. They have hyperlinks to all of the players. There's a highlighted indicator for which players have transferred in. You can see what stage of their career they're at. So you can see the maturation of units such as the offensive or defensive line, which I think is really important. collegefootballnetwork.com is a really good one. And then if you have the Substack app, which is free and a lot of the content is free, State of the Chart is really good. They did Power 5 previews really early on, and they referenced a lot of the key transfers, and they referenced new coaches and coordinators. They referenced position battles that are going to be going on in spring. And so those are all really good resources to try to attempt to get a feel for the personnel for these teams, who is on the 2 deep, and kind of what these teams are going to look like come fall. From there, once the schedules come out, I'm diving into the schedules, because what we're trying to attack right now, possibly some week-to-week wagers if there's some value or if there's a line that's off by a couple of points, but we're diving in, you and I, to the futures market for conference futures and trying to assess value there. And we're diving into the regular season win market. I'm really glad that you referenced the fact that 5 or 10 years ago, if you were placing wagers in June, you were way early to the party. And part of that was, especially out in Vegas, the general rule of thumb was that regular season wins were going to be released Memorial Day weekend. That's when South Point and the Superbook and some of those others would release their regular season win sheets, and they'd allow you to get in line and bet $500 on 3 of them, and then you'd have to go to the back of the line and try and bet whatever else you wanted, and that's kind of how that worked. But now with more liquidity in the markets, with legalization of the activity throughout multiple different states in the country, and with these widespread books like DraftKings and FanDuel and Bet365 and some of these others that are getting to be first in the market, you've got regular season wins that were released at the Power 5 level back on February 1st. And so there is some maturation in the market. There's liquidity. There are some numbers out there that are not moving a ton, so they're probably some pretty solid numbers. So it's really time now to dive into these markets and see where you can attack and try to find weakness in the numbers that are posted. Just some quick hitters too on some other resources that I think are valuable. There's a couple of other websites out there that really specialize in some of the smaller leagues. Hero Sports is a good one for FCS coverage and for G5 coverage. You can find, if you do the research on Twitter and through some of the podcasts, you can find some good podcast coverage of some people like the G5 Hive or Gridiron Unlocked. And those people are interviewing beat writers, equipment managers, people that are close to the program, and they're analyzing what happened last year and kind of the go forward. So there is some content to be extracted from some of that. And it's not just from an enthusiast perspective, which I really appreciate. You'll probably understand where I'm coming from here. There's really no better resource than the spreadsheet. If you create your own spreadsheet and you shore up your notes and you can compile all of the data week to week on the teams that you're honing in on throughout the previous season, and you get a really good feel for that, and then you shore up your spreadsheet going forward after the transfer moves, there's really no better resource than the spreadsheet to try and reconcile the changes and assess kind of where these teams are at. And then from there, it comes out to the schedule, right? And so you and I like to dive into the schedules routinely. We like to really analyze various spots in the schedules that are trouble spots or spots where a team can really try to get on a streak, good or bad. And a lot of diving into the schedule will give you some insight on how teams will potentially perform in the upcoming season.
Absolutely. I love that. There was a couple of those even that you mentioned that I don't follow. So I'm going to be following up on those. And listen, part of the reason I love chatting with you is you know the FCS so well. Very, very little knowledge of FCS for me, you know. So I know that you're fantastic at that and the G5 stuff. I mean, I think the best money could be made in G5 versus those biggest FBS games. You know, the power games where, you know, Ohio State versus Michigan, there's going to be more time put in on a sharper line on that one than there is on ULM versus ULL type of game. Although some people don't want to bet those games, but you know the money spends the same. I don't have to watch the game in order to want to invest on something like that. So I think those were some really good points. I think Connolly's off-season stuff, as far as the returning production, is really a good starting point for people who don't have a ton of time. You know, if you want to be, and some people say to me sometimes, you know, like, hey, I don't have enough time to look at every single team. I don't have enough time to do. There's certainly ways to go about this that you don't have to sit there and break down every single roster. You could specialize in a specific conference. You could say, you know what, I live in the Sun Belt. This is an area where I think I could really get really good. I know some beat writers here. You know, the local newspaper really covers this. It's fine to start out small. You know, some of the best lessons that I ever learned in sports betting was just the specialization and looking at, you know, specifically in college sports, college basketball, college football. It's hard to know everything about every single team. You know, somebody will say, well, who's the third stringer on, the 100th ranked team? That's tough to know right away. But if you're specializing in one specific area, you could really have an edge, because it's also tough for the odds makers to set a great line on every single number that gets put out there. I would echo a lot of things that you said there as far as that. Off-season content. Not all podcasts are created equal. You know that. You can listen to a podcast a time or two, and you can kind of figure out if they're more fans of what they're trying to put out there, or if they're objectively looking at it. I would recommend this time of the year trying to look around for some of those, even if you're going back and saying, let's see what they said before the bowl games. Let's see what they said. Did they have good information? Did they know what they were talking about? Do they sound objective? Just so that you have those people to follow in the off season. When they start putting out content, it pops up and you say, you know what, this is a sharp one. I'm going to keep this one. I have some tabs where I just, have different beat writers and stuff where I say, this is one that seems to give out great information. And I do think that, social media is very helpful. Michael asked here, how do you vet local reporters versus fanboy local news? Is using social media the easiest method? Social media is definitely, I mean, there's positives and negatives to social media. We could talk about that for hours, but social media is definitely very helpful for things like this. Some quick searches and building some lists and putting things together can really help you when it gets to those Saturday nights or something you're trying to figure out about making your numbers for the next week. What injury occurred. Maybe that everybody doesn't know about it yet, but somebody out in Wyoming got injured or something like that. But even in the off season, it can be really helpful because these guys that have a full-time gig are really honed in on these programs that most people are overlooking. So Bobby says here, local journalism, student newspapers. I do like the student newspaper stuff. You can get kind of deep into the weeds on things like that, but I like getting deep into the weeds. I think you do as well. I mean, some of these people, like you're betting on a college basketball game, a SWAC team versus yes, I'm betting on that. Like that's right up my alley. There's times over here, getting personal that my wife or my son will say, why are we watching this game? Isn't there a better game on? I'm like, no, this is the game we're watching right now. This is the game we're watching because, there's good information to come out of that. And I like the edges that can be found in those. But, vetting local reporters versus fanboy local news. I mean, I think you just kind of have to give it a little bit of time. You can figure it out after a while. There's plenty of tells out there when it's like it's pretty obvious somebody's not going to play, but they keep trying to say, you never know, we got to get the latest update on so and so. I mean, they're trying to get ratings. It is what it is. There's plenty of people that do give good information, and I do think social media and building lists is the best way to go about it. I assume you like social media as well as far as trying to simplify things.
I do. Pretty much everybody I follow on Twitter or any of the other socials are going to be conferences, teams, beat writers, people in the gambling space. And I'm trying to get information about teams and trying to disseminate, like you had mentioned, people that are fans and trying to weed out the message board fodder or the enthusiast hyperbole, which can be nonsense. And you try to weed that out, and it might be 85% of it that is bad, but one of every 6 times you'll come across somebody that really is honed in and is realistic and is reporting really solid, accurate information. And so those are kind of the gold nuggets. Those are the people you write down in the notebook and make sure that you tune in with what they're saying and really follow them closely. Because once they have something that's breaking, you'll be able to pounce on it and capitalize. Really, that's all you're trying to do is find those nuggets that'll allow you to be put into a position later on where you can sneak something past the goalie. That's what it's all about.
That's the thing too, is, all you need is one of them. And if you find one that's a really good one, it was worth that extra time that you put in. So keep that in mind as you go forward. Let's move on to a little bit of a, broad-based question here. And I'm gonna say we'll try to keep this to, 10 minutes or so, because I want us to be able to cover several different things here. And I respect the fact that it's late for a lot of people and late for yourself as well. I don't want to keep everybody up really late here, but let's say this. What's your goal for the off season? Like if you just have to say, okay, I've got like 2 or 3 goals. Let's say I'll have you start with, what would you say is your top goal of the off season in college football? Like I start going into it. What do you want to do to try to be prepared for the next year? If you're going to bold something, if you're going to highlight or underline something, what are you trying to do?
My top goal is comprehensive, and it does kind of go hand in hand with the changing landscape in the sport. But really, at this point, I'm trying to get an accurate feel for what these teams are going to look like. And so I'm really trying to assess the rosters. I'm trying to assess experience along the offensive line, who's returning in the skill rooms, how do they look through all 3 levels of the defense, and what sort of cornerstones do these teams have coming back that they can rely on to lean on, in week 8 when their team needs a win to try to get back in the conference race. So where are the cornerstones of what their team has from a production standpoint, and who do they have returning or coming in from the portal? The second thing with that is I'm diving into the changes in coach and coordinator, right? There's been so many times that we've seen even just this year. I mean, there's 45 teams that have new head coaches, and all the coordinator changes are really important. When you have offensive and defensive coordinator changes, they'll often bring in additional personnel to coach position groups. They will bring transfers with them from the school, the incumbent school that they came from, and so you'll see a lot of the personnel. Sometimes no better example of that than a guy like Nick Benedetto, who is the defensive coordinator at Fresno State. He transferred in when Matt Entz was hired at Fresno State from Northern Illinois. Well, what did they do? They brought 6 different players that played significant snaps on defense at Northern Illinois that are coming to Fresno State. So things like that are really important to see what the personnel looks like. And a lot of that can be concomitant to who comes in at the coordinator level. I'm looking for things such as scheme and tempo change. We saw it last year with San Diego State, where Sean Lewis was hired as head coach. He was really in control of the offense. They were trying to run a lot more up-tempo system. Didn't work out in year one because they didn't have the personnel, but that was a tempo change that was drastic from what they'd run before. Oftentimes, defenses will go from running the 3-4 to the 4-2-5 or the 4-3 to a 3-man front. And so how do those schemes look, and do teams have the personnel to try to run their systems? Is there a defensive change like the 3-3-5, which is really hard to grasp, and you have to have the personnel that recognizes the kind of the looks and the checks at the line of scrimmage in order to be competent and be in a position to make a play? Or are those type of teams that are changing schemes, are they going to take some time to get everything together and find their footing? They might look bad for a couple of weeks. One thing that I do want to highlight is, you had mentioned this before, a lot of the preseason publications will come out after the 4th of July. You've got the Lindy's, the Street and Smith, Athlon, and then kind of the college football Bible, as it's been considered, is the Phil Steele college football preview. And oftentimes that would be the trigger for people to start doing the research, right? They go buy the Phil Steele magazine, it's bathroom literature, or they're reading it at the barbecue or whatever else. And you're too late at that point, right? Because if you hone in on Phil Steele, he uses very similar language when he's talking about every team, right? This position group is going to be better than expected. This coach believes in his group. I bet they'll surprise. I think they're going to be better than expected. They could contend for a bowl. Well, you say that about every team, but 134 teams aren't going bowling. So you really have to use Phil Steele appropriately for what the magazine is intended for. But it's best to be ahead of that publication and really dive in and do the work to kind of compensate for the changes in roster turnover. Again, weeding out the message board fodder and the hyperbole. I don't need the perspective of the diehard fans or the people on the message boards that are saying either this guy is going to be great, I guarantee they're going to win 10 games, or this coach sucks and he should get fired. Well, maybe that's true, maybe not, but I want to find a realistic approach and get a good feel for people and for teams and personnel from other sources other than the fan or enthusiast websites. You know, it's really unfortunate with a lot of the spring games being canceled, because the spring game used to be a cheat sheet, right? It used to be an opportunity for me to lock in on a team for 2 hours, put the pencil to the paper with my notebook, watch the game uninterrupted, and used to have, I don't know, 50 or 60 spring games that were televised. This year it was what, 12, 14? So it's kind of a dying art with the spring games, and a lot of teams have eliminated the spring game entirely and gone to some other sort of competition that doesn't resemble football. So it's kind of junk, but you know, you look at teams like Notre Dame that had a spring game. Didn't Ohio State had one, they had to have, right? Or
they changed it up a lot. They're kind of going away from it. I mean, like you said, this is kind of a dying, it doesn't look the way it used to.
Utah's was great. It resembled football. They kept score. There was actual contact. It was one of those great spring games where you could hone in on the players that had transferred in from other schools to Utah. You could see how the defense looked. It was really a nice assessment of where their program was at. Second major goal for me is I go line by line through the schedule. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to assess certain things in the schedule that I can use in my week-to-week wagering. So I'm assessing the non-conference, and I'm also assessing how teams could potentially perform in their non-conference. One team that consistently performs well in the MAC is Miami of Ohio. They're always consistently at the top of the MAC. Their head coach, Chuck Martin, really focuses on MAC play and trying to compete for MAC championships. But they have been notorious in the past for kind of junking the non-conference. And so what do they do every year? They start 1-3. What does that tell me? First thing it tells me is don't bet Miami of Ohio to win the MAC right now, because I'll bet Miami of Ohio when they're 1-3 and the sentiment on them is down, and I can get probably plus 200 better on their conference odds because they're 1-3 as opposed to a team that starts hot and is 4-0 out of the gate. I'm looking at things like that. I'm looking at travel spots in the schedule, back-to-back road trips, or teams off of a rival that have to travel across country, weird sandwich spots, which do happen. And I'm thinking not only straight up win perspective, but also a potential against the spread opportunity, specifically for underdogs. If they can catch a team in a sandwich spot off of a big game, possibly heading back on the road to another big game, you sneak in that sandwich spot, which can be difficult. There are look-aheads, there's revenge spots, lesser-known rivalry games. All of those things, I'm going through the schedule line by line. I'm circling in red ink. I'm doing my notes on the side so I can recall that information later on once the off-season prep is really ramped up. You're in the weeds, you're in the trenches, and you want to go back and recall some notes from May 14th. That's what I do with the schedule. So that's really the second goal of mine during the off-season. So looking at the rosters, I'm looking at the coaching changes and the coordinator changes, scheme and tempo, and then I'm really trying to assess schedule. So I'm ready to go once those group of 5 regular season wins are dropped.
Yeah, I think that's a good overview. I echo a lot of what you said. I think what I used to do is a little bit tougher to do now because I used to just look for massive changes, like where there's not going to be a lot of the same players, but now there's so many massive changes everywhere. Like we said, the transfer portal in the past, I wanted to see that team that looks a lot different than they did the year before because I figure it's tougher for the odds makers to set a number on them at the start of the year. Why do I care? Kirk Ferentz is the same way at Iowa every single year. They're going to look the same. Somebody's going to think they're going to be amazing. They're going to be terrible. They're going to finish similar. It's going to look pretty much the way it did before. Now, I'm not saying it always will. Obviously they're making changes there, but for many years that was the same. I don't want to look at Iowa near as much as I want to look at a team that gets a new coordinator, a new head coach that wants to completely change the way things are going to go, or who lost a star quarterback and is putting in that freshman. I want to look for those changes. I'll go in and just kind of star different teams on the spreadsheet and be like, this is a team that I want to look at really deeply. I'm going to pass on this team. And at the beginning of the year, there's some teams already going into it. I know I don't want to bet at the beginning of the year. I want to sit back and I want to wait, either because I don't think there'll be that much value either way, or there weren't enough changes, I think the Miami, Ohio point is really good too, man, because I remember about 3 years ago, I saw Miami of Ohio and I was like, something's wrong with Miami of Ohio. What's wrong? I'm like, wait a minute, this has happened like 4 or 5 years in a row. Like this is starting to be a real trend here. And the same thing happened again this past year. It kind of seems like they mail it in for those first couple games, trying to be ready for the conference. And I kind of understand the sentiment there in some ways. So, it's good to know that type of thing. You keep those kind of notes and you file it away. Not everybody's going to remember that. Not everybody's going to remember about Miami of Ohio. I would say the other thing that you said there is, I think offensive coordinators are way underrated on how much, I think they matter way more than most people realize. You want the situation where somebody struggled the year before and they bring in some new young gun from FCS that has just played completely different than what they have. And yet the market doesn't really understand what that young gun's going to look like. If they have anything like, the type of pieces that they need there, that could be just massive value right out the gate. And for about 2 or 3 weeks, there could be great value. And then the masses start catching on. But those can also be really good for season win totals too. There can be some really good value there for the fact that, we know some of these coordinators are not very good at their job. It's pretty obvious after a while. They don't make schematic changes that are need to. They don't set up the matchup advantages that they really should get the next guy is going to be an upgrade. Those are the type of ones that I want to look at when it comes to season win totals too, because I already know the team underachieved with the previous people. It's going to be hard to not do better than that. So circling those kind of spots and coming back to those to start with. I also really like to look when I'm setting power ratings. I like to look at the little guy first and wait on the big schools. I know the power ones are the ones that come out first with the season win totals. I mean, to be 100% transparent, I can't bet those right at the beginning anyways. I'm deep into college basketball, MLB, NBA stuff. I'm not going to make some wager right away without feeling like I have some kind of edge. Having said that, I would rather try to be ready early for the G5 ones and come circle back to the Power 4 teams, because I think that there's more value there anyway. So I'm always going to start in one of the smaller schools, smaller conferences, and come back to the bigger ones. Sometimes I've had people be like, wait a minute, you don't have your Big Ten ratings done yet? No, that's like the last one I do. Now, I know the Big Ten pretty well. I see the Big Ten. But I think everybody knows the Big Ten and the SEC pretty well. And that's kind of the problem. So the goal is to look for spots in the market that are more beatable. And I think that, by circling those smaller ones and the big changes and the coordinators, I make spreadsheets with the offensive and defensive coordinator changes and try to, up or down each one of those. And, what kind of scheme did they have before? What do they do now? Those are the type of things that pay off later and make your work easier when you get really busy, when it's really close to the season. It feels a little bit cumbersome when you're doing it in the off season, but there is a reason for something like that. But I think those are all good points. Let's send that on into the talking about win totals, because this is something you and I feel really passionately about. I'll tell you, I think some people really underrate season win totals as far as investment opportunities. Both you and I are investment type people in general, whether it be finance or sports or whatever. But I constantly hear this, well, you want to tie up your money for 6 months? You want to tie up your money for 6 months? I mean, possibly, yeah. I mean, no, I'm not going to say I'm not going to tie up my money for 6 months. I mean, I take out CDs for years at a time. I can take out a 6-month investment that's going to have a lot better ROI in the long run. The other thing is the season win total. If you think about it, there's less variance because there's more games. So if you want one game where the star quarterback can go 24 for 26 and they beat you somehow, even though they clearly are not as good a team, or do you want the 12 game sample? Over the long run, I've done quite a bit better on season win totals even than the single game bets. That wasn't the case this last year, but I was a little bit late starting last year with my season win totals and stuff. I'm going to be a little bit quicker here this year. And it's just the ever-changing landscape does make that a little bit of a challenge. So I did want to get your philosophy on, why do you like betting season win totals? I know you like certain bets on those better than others, but I want to let you go with that. And then also, how do you decide whether you want to bet like a long shot future versus the season win total? Because this is a question I've gotten a lot too. Like, well, wait a minute, you said you like this team as a long shot. Why aren't you betting them over the season win total? What's the risk there? So why do you like season win totals? How does that look like on your end?
It's a dynamic question. It's a great question. And we've seen explosivity in the market for regular season wins over the last couple of years. That's really an exploding and emerging market that I'm really excited to see more popularity with. Regular season wins are my absolute favorite prop style bet to make in any sport anywhere. I love college football regular season wins. I believe there's tremendous value. I'll qualify that with the fact that 90% of my regular season win plays are usually on a team to finish under their posted total. So I do bet regular season win unders. One reason I do that, it's simple poor man's math. If you add up all of the regular season win totals and you would try to factor a path for each team to surpass those, there's not enough games. Why would that be? Well, lines are shaded to the favorite and they're shaded to the over. It's just what people like to see. They like to root for the better team, and they like to root for high scoring or teams to have success. And so I find there's a lot of value in simply looking to the under. It's just where the value lies. So I like to do that. I think that there is a great opportunity to really hone in on teams that are in favorable situations, as you had alluded to, with a new dynamic quarterback, a new offensive coordinator that's going to bring a fresh perspective, a beefed up offensive line or a rejuvenated offensive line who surged late in the year. And so you can kind of see some of those pieces kind of coming to fruition. One team to potentially keep an eye on this year in that emerging perspective would be a team like Air Force, who really, really struggled early in the season last year. They were putrid against their rival service academies. They couldn't run the ball. They had no attitude on the offensive line. And the switch flipped the last 4 weeks of the season. It was a completely different team with attitude. They were ticked off on the offensive line. It was just night and day difference. So that's a team to look at that's emerging. And you can find spots like that where teams can get on a roll and you'll be ahead of the Vegas perception. I generally look at it the other way, where you're looking at teams that possibly overachieved. Their successful season was potentially a blip in the radar, and teams are going to now revert back to the mean. And maybe they lose their head coach, offensive coordinator, and or quarterback. Possibly they had a senior-laden offensive line that's now going to be relying on FCS transfers to kind of fill some holes. Well, that generally doesn't go well, especially early on. And then so there's a couple of things that I am always looking at. I'm looking at with regular season wins, certainly the returning production and the continuity on both sides of the ball. I don't want to underestimate how important a solid offensive line is in just playing football, right? Offensive line is really the drum that beats with the offense, and you protect the quarterback, you open up holes for the running game, you allow the quarterback time to assess the defense and make accurate throws. Without an offensive line, doesn't happen. The defensive front seven is another thing. If you have key pieces in personnel that are lost along the defensive front seven, teams will gash you and there's no stopping it. And that doesn't bode well to winning football games. But you had alluded to something that I really appreciate and I really hone in on myself with regular season wins. You're betting on a team to go over or under their posted regular season win total. Well, what does that mean for you as a bettor? You have action for 12 weeks, right? And you're eliminating the Vegas week-to-week perception changes with an against the spread type of position, because you just need the team to win a game or lose a game. Spread is obsolete in this situation. So you have action for so many weeks. If you do the offseason prep work and if you get a good feel on a team, and analyzing the schedule is also really critical to see where a team might be in their mindset. What's really fascinating and enlightening to me is when you analyze a schedule, you can just almost have that foresight of seeing teams that maybe they play the first 5 weeks. 3 of the games are tough non-conference games. Then they play a service academy. Well, my goodness, by that 5th week, they might be the better team, but they're sucking wind and itching for that bye week to try to get healthy. You can kind of see spots like that. So what happens? It flips a win to a potential loss where a normal casual fan may not look at it that way. What does that do? Well, that just flips the regular season win total percentage in your favor. It's not like Major League Baseball or the NBA where there's 81 or 162 games and one win doesn't matter. There's 12 games. One win increases your house edge by 12%. It's hugely important. And so when you can find just 1 or 2 of those schedule spots to hone in on, makes all the difference. And you hit the nail on the head too by trying to potentially focus on the group of 5, right? There's a lot of value in Conference USA win totals or the American or the Mountain West, Sun Belt, so on and so forth. So I find that the regular season win totals, it's an enjoyable wager because you have action all year. I have no issue locking up my money because I've had success with it. I know my rhythm and my process. I know what I'm looking for. And when I identify those, I strike while the iron's hot when those lines are posted. I shop around to try to get the best lines to give myself the best chance to succeed, which we'll get into in a little bit here. Really, really important to find yourself the best odds, put yourself in the best position to succeed, because that VIG can add up over time, and a half a win really matters. Again, we'll get into that in a little while as well here in the conversation. Another thing that's really, really important, and it really ties into the changing landscape with college football, is we've seen over the last couple of years such a change in shift with conference realignment. So what do you have now? You have 16 team super conferences with the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, and the Big 10, all having 16 opponents in the league. You have an unbalanced schedule. And so you have these teams that are rated now 1 through 16, we'll say, and you're only going to play 7 or 8 of those teams in conference play. So can you hone in on a team that may not necessarily be a favorite to win the league, but maybe they avoid the top 4 teams in league play, and their schedule is ridden with some of the bottom teams? You can kind of have that foresight of seeing a team get on a roll, right? They could really have some momentum. They could really start to get themselves playing some good football, but you could easily surpass a win total of 5.5 in a position like that, where you rattle off 4 or 5 wins in a row against lesser foes. Yeah, you may not threaten to win the league, but you can certainly exceed a regular season win total. Same thing is true on the opposite point. So it's really important to dive into that. We saw that last year with teams like Duke and Georgia Tech, where those teams didn't necessarily threaten to win the ACC, but they feasted on some teams that were lesser foes in league play, and they exceeded their win totals without exception. And it wasn't even, it was those overs on those 2 teams were really never in question. So I like to try to find spots like that. It's so important to, again, go to the schedule and assess the strength of the schedule, the strength of the opponents, get a feel for who they're playing, where they could possibly trip up or surprise. Really critical with regular season wins.
Agree. A lot of the stuff you just said is things that I would say. I'll try to just add a couple things that slightly different, for me. I want to look for teams where the masses are hyping them, like the teams that everybody's like, well, this team is way better than they were last year. All the major writers, the ESPN guys are really pushing this team as a team that could win the championship. And you're going, man, are they that much better than they were last year? I want to look closely at those teams. Also, kind of going back to the Phil Steele point, I think Phil Steele's magazine is still really helpful. And I understand why he does what he does as far as every team's going to be better. But, you just have to understand going into it that, that's what's going to, this team's going to improve. Well, wait, the last team was going to improve. Then this team's going to improve. But I think from that, there can be some teams get some massive steam from Phil Steele's recommendations too. And it's not me necessarily saying that he's not good at what he does. I think he's very sharp. He knows what he's doing. He knows these teams very well. The information he puts out there is high quality. The problem is if somebody says, this season win total was 6 and now it's 7.5, just because this publication came out, then you and I are just going to start going, wait a second, I got to go back and look at this. Like this might've been too much. I like to kind of go against some of those moves, especially if you're later on placing those bets. That's where you can kind of fade the steam a little bit. I also like to bet unders with G5 teams who just lost a great coach or a star player. You touched on this earlier. They can't replace people the same way Georgia can. They can't replace people the same way Ohio State can. They can't replace like Bama. Those teams, they lose that key guy that somehow stuck around there for a while. It's going to be a big loss. And if they lose an offensive coordinator that was, this hot shot that did an amazing job there, it's going to be tough to do as well with the next hire. So those are kind of teams that I like to look for unders for the G5 teams that have to reload. The other thing is the schedule. If you have like a brutal 4 or 5 week stretch early or mid-season, some people like to talk about this just from a week to week thing. Like, well, for 4 weeks, team A has a really tough stretch, but then it's going to be easy at the end of the year. But what if they're already kind of defeated by that point? They already lost. They went through this run. They got banged up. They got pushed around for a while. If you're mentally defeated halfway through the season, that team that should have beaten the last 2 or 3 opponents might not beat the last 2 or 3 opponents. So when they play those teams, when they go through that schedule, I think plays a really important role. You could underachieve your record. You could set a team ahead at the beginning of the year and have PRs that have this team as, they should probably win 6.5 games, but look at the schedule. I don't think I want to bet over 6 because they play some really tough teams at the beginning. I don't know what they'll be like at the end of the season. If I knew they were going to be like this, maybe they'd get them. But I think that's kind of a cautionary thing. Final thing on win totals before we move on. We'll say the prices here, but I want to ask you, when do you like to bet these win totals now? What is your plan for timing on these? Because I know it's hard to bet them in, early April because you don't even know who's going to be on what roster yet. But what's the kind of timing that you like to set?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. And I do want to answer it, but I do not want to understate one thing that you did say. Teams do have this kind of mental ambiguity that they have this makeup with throughout the season. And so you are exactly right. You could have a team that has a higher win total and they go through this stretch and they're sitting at 2-4. Well, what's the mentality of the team? And is this a team that has possibly had conference future shot? There's no national championship future shot. They're not really competing for what they possibly set out in their preseason goals. So a team's mental complexion can play into the motivation and the competition enthusiasm later on in the season. It's another reason why I stress unders. You can find teams that you could identify, goodness, they just lost 3 in a row. And that last team that defeated the team, well, that carries over to the next week. So now they lose a game that they shouldn't. Now they're 2-5. It's just really hard to get back up for the remaining portion of your schedule. So I really am glad that you stressed that. To get into when I like to strike in regular season wins, like I had mentioned earlier, this is kind of there's some fluidity in my timing because of the changing landscape and when regular season wins are released. I usually used to always dive into my intense regular season prep in early May in anticipation for that Memorial Day release. But now that the Power 5 win totals have already been released, I've really spent some time assessing and deep diving those numbers. One thing that I will give the books credit for is that you've seen that these numbers have not moved drastically. I can only recall Kentucky and Wake Forest that have moved even half a win. And so we haven't had a lot of drastic movement, which tells me that either A, important players in the betting space are not focused on college football regular season wins at this point, or maybe the books put out some pretty good numbers on these Power 5 teams. So let's just kind of wait and see. Let's see if we get some news similar to the stocks, like you mentioned. You buy the news and sell the stock. So that's kind of what we're going to do. I'm going to just kind of hold off for a minute here and see kind of where this market ends up trending. Once the G5 gets released, it's no holds bar, right? I will really start to hone in on where I want numbers to get to. I'm already doing that now with some preseason prep where I'm going through teams line by line. I'm assessing 2 ways. I'm kind of assessing a percentage of likelihood that a team is going to win a particular game. And then you can kind of add all that up throughout the season. You get a projected win total number. It could be 3.25, could be 8.65, whatever that number is. But then the other way I do look at it, I think this is a good exercise, is I will go through, it's pass or fail, right? Because what happens on the football field, you either win the game or you don't. You don't get a 0.65 win. So do they win the game? Yes or no? What does that look like? Is a team 2-10 or are they 4-8? Could be a big difference in the win total. So I try to go through the exercise both ways, see how calibrated I can get those numbers. I'm doing it in the G5 now, so that way when those numbers are released, let the markets open up a bit, make sure I can get down enough money that I want to get down, release the plays out to people who want to get the action for regular season wins, and then fire away. I don't have a time frame on necessarily when I want to wait. However, I do want to make sure that I'm firing in on these plays after I feel comfortable with the personnel that's going to be on the team, if the coaches have all stuck. And so generally for me, that's going to be after about June 15th with the group of 5. Once those numbers get released, I'm not going to make any plays before about June 15th. After that, it's fair game.
Yeah, I think later on in June is a pretty good time frame for that. You want to know for sure who's going to be on that team. It sounds kind of stupid to even say, but it's pretty stupid obvious that you want to know who's going to be on the team. And also, even after that window closes, there can be guys get in trouble. There can be, there's different reasons for why somebody might not be on a team other than just the portal. Did you have something else you wanted to say too?
Yeah, one part of the question that we didn't get to that I wanted to circle back to, you had asked a question about how I assess if I wanted to play a regular season win or if I wanted to potentially play a team as a long shot to win the conference. Well, one thing that's widely known in gambling and any sports betting market that's there is when a casino is offering something that has a high total possible outcomes of a market, what does that do? It increases their handle and their hold. So if you have a market such as to win the ACC, well, there are 16 or 17 possibilities of that. And so when you actually do the mathematics of factoring what the casino hold is, my goodness, for some of these leagues, it could be 35%. When you're talking about a regular season win and maybe a minus 110 or minus 115 on either side, the hold is significantly less. So I'm going to try to assess mathematically where I have an advantage for either playing a regular season win over under, or if a team is just so severely mispriced in the conference future market, I will attempt to take a stab with conference futures. Super long shots, right? 30 to 1, 40 to 1, and longer, 100 to 1. I'm trying to put myself in a position where a team can rattle off a couple of wins early, get that number to a different spot, and then I can try and come back the other way and possibly hedge out of a position because it's just so rare. I mean, Arizona State did it last year at 100 to 1, but it's just so rare that 100 to 1 or 60 to 1, 70 to 1 is going to shoot up and win the league. But if you have a position early and a team does move up in their position, you can kind of get some action down on some of those other groups and some of those other teams to somewhat put yourself in a position where you're going to win money no matter what happens. So I'll try to do that from time to time if I feel that there's a severe misprice. We've already seen that in 2025 with the team that I took a conference future on with Utah that was significantly mispriced. A lot of people agreed with that play. But I think generally speaking, the mathematics work out that you will put yourself in a better position if you can try to identify a regular season win because there are significantly fewer possible outcomes. You have 2 outcomes on the regular season win, over or under, as opposed to 16 possible outcomes with a conference future.
I think that's a good way of saying it. I bet Utah largely because of what you said there. I mean, and listen, if I can get a reason to bet on a Whittingham team, I mean, I'm gonna love Kyle Whittingham, fantastic, and I love the fit there for the quarterback. So, but I will say for the future versus win total, this would be a deeper discussion that I want to keep really brief here because I want us to get to cover plenty. But I think also one thing that's kind of lost on some people is that for futures, if you take a long shot, you could understand there's a lot of variance there. I know this team might have a bad season, but they also have a high ceiling. I want the high ceiling teams that might have a low floor. That's fine with me if I'm taking a long shot. If I'm betting a win total, I don't want a big unknown. I mean, unknown is the enemy of a bet like that. It's like in the stock market. I mean, you don't want the unknown. I mean, that's what the stock market hates the most. And it should be the same in this. So, if I'm taking a future, I don't want to take the future that's minus 125, even though that team is way better than everybody else. I mean, I'm gonna bet them week to week. I want to take the future that I think you probably won't be able to find halfway through the season because I think that somebody's going to find out that this was a good, pairing between coach and new quarterback or whatever it may be. And I agree with you. I would much rather bet more win totals than I would futures. In fact, I kind of would rather bet futures at some point in the season when people are too low on them than I would bet a bunch of them before the season. Just because, like you said, it's kind of the highs and lows, and everybody's going to play a bad game at some point. There's always that team where you go, how are these guys, in this championship game? I remember when they lost to them. Well, everybody has a bad game. It's going to happen. You got to kind of give them a pass. They're college kids. So I think season win totals are better because, like you said, the hold is so drastic, and there's two possible outcomes. Uh, that segues a little bit into the next point. I do want to make this one really quick because it's quick, but it's important. Both of us feel really strongly about this one. Um, the shopping around for the best prices. I mean, I can't tell you how many people don't do this enough. I mean, I can't believe the amount of people that have one book and they say, well, my book has plus 1,000. Well, somebody else's book has plus 2,000. Well, that's okay. If it wins, then, I'm still going to be happy that it won. Yeah, I mean, it's still going to be nice that it won. But let's not kid ourselves. There's a big difference between plus 1,000, plus 2,000. There's a big difference between 1,200 and 1,800, for example. And I pretty firmly disagree with the people who say that they never hedge. Like, I understand that you can hedge too much, and but if you get a plus huge number in there, and you get to the final game, and somebody says, "Listen, hedging's for gardeners. You just don't hedge no matter what," and then they lose that last game. I mean, you're just going to hate yourself for this. The entire season, you were right about this team, and you got nothing out of it. You have to get something. And I don't even think you should hedge fully. I mean, you can keep more on that team and still get a profit the other way. I think that's easy enough to do. But, for me, shopping around win totals, it matters quite a bit. Futures, it matters even more. I mean, it's just massive differences in futures prices. Win totals, you can have the juice be a lot different. You could get a plus 100 one place where you would have gotten minus 140. I don't have to tell you how big of a difference that is. You're going to lose some of them. If you lose, you'd rather lose that plus 100 than you would the minus 140 every single time. And I'm kind of wondering what you think on this too, Josh. What do you think half a win counts for? Because I know people argue about this. What is half a win worth? Because some of these books are going to put out this kind of alt line type setups where it's, over 2.5, minus 180. Do you want to lay the minus 180? Do you want to take the over 3? What do you look at on those?
Great points. Real quickly, I will say that for any sports bettor investor at any level, the quickest and easiest way that you can improve your position and improve your ROI as a sports bettor is to shop around and get yourself in the best position to win. Get the best line. Specific to regular season wins, I value a half a win at about 60 or 70 cents. So if I can get over 5.5 at minus 110, but I can get over 5 flat at minus 150, I'm going to play that because the VIG is less than what I disseminate a half of a win to be worth. And long term, you're going to be in a spot where it almost affects you by 2 games, because over 5.5, well, you've got to win 6 games in order to clear that hurdle. When you get to over 5, a team might be sitting there at 4 and 6. Well, you just got to win one of the next 2 to at least get yourself into a push situation. And so I do like to try to find situations specifically in that 4.5, 5.5, 6.5 range when teams may be competing for or not competing for bowl eligibility. I think it can be really, really critical. If you're talking about difference between 7.5 or 8, may not make that much of a difference long term, but definitely 4.5, 5.5, 6.5 it will. But half a win, regular season win, I'd value at about 70 cents and 60 or 70 cents. So again, this is not an MLB win total that might be 93.5. You're talking about 12 games, and go find that extra half a win. Excuse me. You'll find that also with variance in different market makers, shopping around is so critically important. You can find, like you had alluded to, one win total at under 5.5 might be minus 145. The other might be minus 105. Well, that difference in ROI year over year is just so critically important. And so it is a convenience factor with some people. They're comfortable with a particular book. They've got the mobile phone. They've got the outline of the app and what they, the different colors and all the different stuff they're used to on their phone. But go get 3 or 4 books minimum. Put your money spread out amongst the bunch that you can have access to, and just do a little extra work. It takes work. It takes some discipline to log in, put in the password, do the two-factor authentication, but go in there and dive in to see where the odds can be varied, because you'll just find over the long term, you'll see your bankroll grow in an exponential way when you're shopping around and getting the best lines. It is the easiest thing that you can possibly do, and it requires no talent.
Yeah, that's true. It requires absolutely no talent, a little bit of time, not as much time as you might think nowadays. It's pretty quick, but it's going to be well worth it in the long run. That the ROI on the time that you're putting in there is fantastic. I think 65 cents is a good guess for what a half a win is worth. I do think that it doesn't matter as much if it's 10 and a half and 10 or 9 and a half and 10. When you get those smaller numbers, or when you're in that, maybe bowl, whether they want to get to a bowl there at the end of the season and in the 5.5 range, that's going to matter more than it is up higher. So you could certainly make an argument that you should be, if you want to say it's worth 65 cents at this number, it might be worth a little bit more in a different situation, a little bit less in a different situation. But that's kind of the mean there. I think that's very fair. And shopping around is just it's important week to week, but it's really important if you want to take seriously betting season win totals and futures. All right, let's go into. I don't want to keep everybody too long. Like I said, both of us have talked on this for a long time. I know. So if you have to go at any point soon, let me know too, and we'll cut off. But we've got. We want to talk briefly about common pitfalls of the average sports bettor when it comes to college football. Let's make these bullet points, and we can discuss this more in the future, because I do want to get to a couple specific examples to kind of tease being able to talk about this a little bit more in the future. I'll start here. Some people read too much into what they just saw in the bowl game. Some of these bowl games, really, they don't mean anything to some of these teams.
Not anymore.
That's the thing. And they don't even have most of their players playing in the game, the key players playing in the game. And then people go back and say, well, Team A, they looked really good in the bowl game. Well, Team B in the bowl game didn't care at all. So does it really matter? I don't think it matters much at all. I'd rather go back to an earlier point in the season than I would that. The other thing is, if you wait too long to start working on this, that's probably your other biggest pitfall, is just, if you wait until August, you're so far behind that it's going to put you in a really bad spot. I think the average sports bettor, when it comes to college football, gets overwhelmed by so many teams and so much to try to go from. If you actually want to follow all of them and be really knowledgeable about every team, you have to put a lot of time into it. If you don't, it's fine to specialize. It's fine to sit out and wait for the Sun Belt games or the MAC games or whatever it may be. I know some people, FCS, people that are really good in specific areas in FCS, and my friend here at Step on a Duck has been fantastic at the FCS stuff. Some of the times he's pulling out some of this stuff, and I'm like, I had no idea. I really had no idea. And those are fun for me, because finding those hidden gems in Illinois State, or teams that are just absolute. You only hear about them in basketball usually, and football. Some people are starting to realize that the FCS is some value, and I think that's a discussion we can talk about a different time too. But the pitfalls of looking at what you just saw and waiting too long and kind of overwhelming yourself to start the season, because then you're like, oh, what do I do? I'm just cramming. It's like cramming for an exam last minute. It never goes well. If you start the season on the wrong foot, things are liable to tailspin. You don't want to start really poorly and feel like, it's the whole, I'm going to make it back theory. I just went 0-3 on Sunday. I have to bet the Sunday night game for even more. It's the worst idea in the world. You didn't want to bet the game to start with. I think that you can do that betting college football if you're behind at the beginning and you feel like there's just pressure. You have to do something. Like, I'm supposed to be good at this. Let's do it. So plan it out wisely. What would you add to that briefly?
Yeah, we'll do a couple quick hitters, and some of it we've already touched on, so I'll be real brief. Where are you finding your information? One of the common pitfalls of the average sports bettor is Where are they getting their info? Is it ESPN Bet and the experts they have as a pundit on ESPN or Fox Sports? Because I'm here to tell you right now, those people are not experts in this craft, right? People who just these slapping odds up there on the screen and you try to make 1 point, not where you need to get your information. Similar to Twitter and some of the enthusiast websites, some of that stuff can be a gold mine, or they can hand out a lot of turd sandwiches. So you really have to disseminate where you're getting your information, what the people are saying, and really try to avoid some of the junk material that's out there. You see it all over Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, the SGPs and the walking bets and all this other goofy stuff. It's like that is just absolute garbage. When you have a source that you're relying on that's constantly pumping out these 3,000 to 1 SGPs, I mean, you're just not going to win it that long term, and the books will happily take your action forever. Don't fall for it. Something you mentioned very early on in the show, people will often only bet the big games. Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Miami, Ohio State, Penn State. Those are great games to watch as a fan. It's a lot of eye candy. They're exquisite to attend in person, and there can be value in some of the elements of the betting menu for those games. But you know what? Money on Middle Tennessee State spends just as well as money on an SEC fave. So don't ignore the G5 and, kind of hits home for me, but the FCS ranks as well. One thing that people really don't realize in football is that teams can improve or regress throughout the season, and teams take on a mold throughout the season. And there's nobody more in tune with that than the coaching staffs. And coaching staffs know when to push their teams in practice or when to implement load management. We've seen the SEC do this for years, where they'll schedule weaker G5 or FCS competition late in the season. The spreads are always 45.5 or so, and much more than half of those teams don't cover. Those teams are just simply content winning by 3 or 4 touchdowns, controlling the game. It's a roster game. And so kind of know when teams are in a spot where, yeah, they're going to control the game and win, but they might need an exhale spot, because playing football is so hard and taxing on your body, 12, 13 games a season plus postseason. And so knowing when teams kind of need a mental breather is really critically important and often gets overlooked. The last thing that I'll say that we really have not covered is don't ignore coaching tendencies, right? You've got coaches that have this documented history, not over 1 year, but maybe over 10 years. Matt Rule getting very, very conservative in second half nature with how he runs his offense and sitting on leads. James Franklin is a coach that knows the number, and he's going to routinely try to punch it in late because he knows what the backers want. It's not me just speaking hyperbole or fandom. That's fact. They will punch it in late, year in and year out, game in and game out. A team that does not do that is Liberty. Jamie Chadwell, champion of sportsmanship, will constantly, their team will be on the goal line late. They could punch it in. What does Liberty do? They take knees. They don't punch it in. So knowing those coaching tendencies is really, really important. And then in closing with this particular question, my goodness, we've talked about it up and down. Don't start late. Don't think you can grab a Street and Smith, an Athlon, or a Phil Steele, sit on the toilet for 3 weeks and read this magazine and think you're going to be an expert at the water cooler and you're going to go win your bets. It just doesn't happen that way anymore, where you can try to find that. Phil Steele's no secret. Everybody can get it, and everybody knows about it. You've really got to start your prep early, put in the work, be in the weeds, grinding with the rosters, putting the numbers together, and find those advantages early on. So that way, when the markets that are not available as we speak today emerge, or week to week, you're ready to fire away because you've done the prep 3-4 months prior.
Absolutely. I like it. Let's get to a little bit of specific examples here. So we talked about broad, what do you do to be prepared? I know some of the people watching, which I want to say too, 591 people watching. I love seeing that number go up. We must be doing something right here. So thank you for watching. Hit the thumbs up button. Give Josh a follow at Step on a Duck. Is there a one, or what is it?
Yeah, Step on a Duck one.
I was going to say, I thought there was a one there. Follow me at Kyle Hunter Picks there on X or Twitter. And, we're going to be doing some more here coming up in the off season. We got some fun things planned, and I'm looking forward to the season ahead. I mean, in 3 months, it'll be here before you know it. Let's talk about a couple specific things, though. A couple transfer portal moves that you like for the team who got the player. I kind of want to go with some under the radar ones that, I mean, everybody knows about some of the very biggest names. So let me go one, and then you go one. Let's just do a couple back and forth here really quick.
Yeah.
First, Ahmad Hardy to Missouri. At ULM, he was really good. I mean, he did a very good job. He forced 82 missed tackles last year, which is behind two people in the country, Ashton Genty and Scadaboo. Pretty good, people to be behind in broken tackles. Missouri, I think, got a pretty good under the radar name there in Ahmad Hardy. Not going to be one that's going to be, posterized everywhere out there, but I think he'll be a good find there for them.
Yeah, and we have another question coming up, and we'll talk Missouri as far as scheduling, but that's a good one there. Matthew Sluka going to JMU, reuniting with head coach Bob Chesney, who was at Holy Cross. Really, really a good pickup for him. He flourished in their offense. Things played out the way they played out at UNLV, but I think that we're going to get a new lease on life for Matthew Sluka, and JMU is a team that underwhelmed last year. I think they're going to overperform this year.
That would not surprise me at all. I like that one. All right, I'm going to go with I know you guys know this guy well based on where he's from as well. Chase Sowell from East Carolina going to Iowa State. So if you look at Iowa State, what they've had kind of a weakness in the past is they're not that deep at wide receiver. Sowell has he's like 6'4", 6'4.5", something like that. Really tall, great frame, good ball skills in general as well. He comes from that pass-happy offense where he got plenty of chances. I think that's a good pickup for an Iowa State. Iowa State plays in a really competitive conference where there's going to be a lot of close games. I think they have some nice pieces. And Sowell is one that's not going to be on the front cover of anything either. This is not Nico. It's not Carson Beck or anybody like that. But I think that's one that could be a sneaky good ad there.
Just real quick sentiment there. So for those that don't know, I live in Wilmington, North Carolina. I spent 20 years in the upper Midwest, and last year moved my family to the beach in Wilmington. East Carolina is just up the road. I see a lot of ECU football. Chase Sowell is a wonderful receiver, really big frame, makes really good, tough, contested catches over the middle, not afraid to stick his nose in there and reach his hands out and make a catch on 3rd and 12 to get a first down. Really good pickup. That's a really valuable nugget. My next one, we'll talk about Northwestern. I like the fact that Preston Stone ended up there. I think he'll do really well as quarterback for Northwestern, but Griffin Wilde is an exquisite receiver. He played at the FCS level for South Dakota State. The way that they play called at South Dakota State was much more run heavy, and they really didn't utilize their weapons the way they could have and should have. Actually caused some friction in the Jackrabbit locker room late last season before they kind of pivoted and made some changes after a bye week. But Griffin Wilde, it was always an FBS talent, and he was recruited by some Big 12 schools out of high school, and some of them just never came through or whatever else. But Griffin Wilde is an exquisite receiver who will make an immediate impact on the Northwestern Wildcat pass attack.
Nice. Yeah, I like that one. Northwestern, well-coached team, a team that's gotten a lot out of what they had. So you find good spots like that. Northwestern's always going to be up against it, playing against the competition that they have, certainly. But nice to find some good pieces there. Did you have any others that you want to point out here real quick before we go to the scheduling one?
I mean, I love our guy Devin Dampier, who quarterbacked at New Mexico, was absolutely electric. I think that we'll see two things that I want to take from him, right? So he's a very dynamic athlete. He's fast. He has a good arm. He sees holes to know when to scramble and pick up yards with his feet. He did have some turnover-worthy plays and did have a problem with kind of trusting his arm too much and trying to make all the throws. Some of them were bad, but go back and watch the tape on the Utah spring game. That guy made 3 or 4 electric throws, and I think it's a really big driver in why I like Utah to overperform this year. They are going to get back to physicality in the run game, and he's going to add a running element from the quarterback position that should make the Utah offense electric. And it's hard to say because if you recall watching Utah the last 6 weeks of the season, their offense was stuck in the quickcrete badly, and they could not move the football. I think you're going to see a completely revamped Utah offense. got to mention Damp.
Absolutely.
And the last thing I'll say is New Mexico, I think, is going to take a significant regression. They've lost a lot of pieces, right? Bronco Mendenhall went to Utah State. They lost running backs. They lost their stud receiver, Wysong. They lost a couple guys on defense. Defense wasn't very good anyway, but 6 of their defensive starters transferred to Utah State. You are going to see significant issues that were masked by Devin Dampier's electric play and elusiveness that their incumbent quarterback projected. It was the starter at Idaho last year, Jack Lane, not nearly as mobile, will not have as much time, and is not going to bail out the offensive line. I think New Mexico is one of those teams that is really going to struggle to compete. I like the coach hire, Jason Eck, long term, but I do not think New Mexico is going to have a very successful season, in part because many of their guys, but Damp is not there anymore. So it's going to be kind of twofold is what I wanted to make a point on there.
I agree with you. And Mendenhall's a really good coach. So that's a tough job to step into right away. All right. So we could say plenty more of those, obviously, but we'll keep it brief. And we can talk more specifically about, player changes, different hires that we like a lot and future shows. But I do want to go scheduling spots. We talked about this. I really like looking for these early on, just find this random spot where it sounds kind of nerdy, but then you find this one, you're like, oh yes, this is the one. I really like this. I get too excited about spots like this, 4 months out, but that's the type of thing that if you have that kind of mindset, it's going to help you in the long run. You want to circle these and come back and, that week rolls around. You're like, wait a minute, this is the one that I put an asterisk by earlier on. Give me one scheduling spot that you've circled for the season ahead. We can talk more about more of these in the future, but I want to hear one so that the viewers, listeners could get a look into what you're looking at here.
Yep, certainly. I've said this ad nauseum on the program here, but diving into the schedule is so critical. And if you do it for all 134 teams, you're going to find a spot for each team. One quick nugget, something I've never seen before. I said we'd come back to Missouri. If you go to the Missouri schedule, their first 6 games of the season are at home. No neutrals, no kickoff classics or any of that. First 6 games first 6 games are at home. I've never seen that before. But one specific schedule spot that I wanted to highlight, Washington State and Oregon State are now playing true independent schedules. There's no longer the scheduling agreement with the Mountain West where they were playing 7 Mountain West teams as non-conference foes. And so true independent schedules. You look at Wazoo travel way up in the Pacific Northwest. They go to North Texas, Colorado State, Ole Miss, Virginia, and James Madison. But specifically, their trip to Virginia is the second of long back-to-back roadies. The week before, they're going to get beat up by Ole Miss on the road. Then they've got to travel to Charlottesville to Virginia, and Virginia's off a bye. I think that's a great spot to circle the Who's in red ink. Washington State could certainly be sucking wind there. It's so many long travel spots for Washington State. I like the spot here because I don't certainly won't get a look ahead line, but I don't think necessarily that it's going to be recognized. Wazoo lost their head coach, Jake Dickert, to Wake Forest. They brought in an FCS coach. They brought in 22 players from FCS that are going to be contributors. What does that do? It just drops the talent level of the 2 deep down a notch. They're not going to be as competitive as the electric Wazoo team that we saw with John Mateer and all the pass catchers that they had last year. It's going to be a significantly different offensive scheme. That team is going to look a lot different. Back-to-back road trips at Ole Miss, and then especially that second one at UVA is going to be a real tough trip for them.
I laugh because we didn't share notes ahead of time. So the fact that we ended on the same team, it's not the same game, but the same team, Washington State. I'm looking at Washington State's schedule and I'm like, man, this is wild. This is something else. I'm looking at Washington playing Washington State on September 20th. And that game obviously means a lot to those 2 teams.
Apple Cup.
And then you go play Colorado State the next week. And, at altitude, you're going to go play, depending on how that game goes the week before, Washington State. how much is Washington State going to be up for going to Colorado State, depending on what happened in the rivalry the week before? I mean, obviously, that's dependent on how the game went. If they pull off this stunning win, or if they, fight really hard all the way to the end, that's what I'm looking for. But I like to look for spots where a team could be worn out going into altitude, and I think that kind of fits there going to Fort Collins. Washington State has just landmines all over their schedule. I mean, you could even argue some of their home games are difficult spots because they had such long travel, and then they come back to play a team that might be amped up to play a bigger name school. So Washington State to me is the best one I've seen so far as just finding schedule spots. I really like the Colorado State spot. I don't have a deep dive yet on Colorado State to know whether I really want to bet Colorado State. It's more of I think there's some fade spots here for Washington State. They lost a lot. This is going to be a really tough schedule to navigate. You go to North Texas, you go to Colorado State, you go to Ole Miss, you go to Virginia, you come back to play Toledo, then you go to Oregon State. I mean, that is wild. There's going to be some really tricky spots. I love situational spots like this. This is the type of schedule that I like. I kind of wonder, I mean, you wonder why they had to play this schedule. We know why it is. They don't have much of a choice anymore. It sucks to be an AD and not really have the conference that you can just, count on. But there's not much they can do, but they're going to put themselves in a bad situation a lot here. I think this could go really poorly from an against the spread standpoint for Washington State this year. And that's not even necessarily a knock on their new coach. It's just, that's the way it's set up for them. So it's funny, though. I thought when you said Washington State, I'm like, what are the odds that we both bring up Washington State as the one that we were really looking at? But I like that. That's pretty cool. It's been fun to go over this. I do have to say there was this question over on the side here, and I'm gonna. It's up to you whether you answer this or not. But I have to say, I have never asked you this. I have thought this a couple times. I'm like, should I? Where did this come from? Do you want to say this here, or do you not?
Yeah, I've had my Twitter handle for 10 years. It's also what I was known at on many of the prominent gambling forums, Capping the Game, the RX forum, covers.com. I was known as the Duck, and I had to create a handle, and I had the movie Caddyshack, Step on a Duck. It was a Rodney Dangerfield reference. It really means nothing, but yeah, it was just it was available, it flowed, and I just threw it up there with my icon of the quacker there, and it just kind of stuck. And so I've never changed it, and now I'm kind of anchored in and committed to it, and so that's what it is. It's just a Caddyshack reference as well.
All right, there was no deeper reason for that or anything.
Nope.
Got it.
I've been asked that many times as well.
Yeah. I can't believe I haven't asked you that before, but Bobby, Farmageddon week 1. Yeah, I will say that those are some topics that are crazy. We'll have to get to later.
The great thing, though, is I will say for all the listeners, and I definitely sincerely appreciate 591 people tuning in, keep the questions coming, because you and I talked off air that we plan to have this be recurring, right? We're going to have multiple shows throughout the off season. I'm really excited to give people some nuggets. I'm not an Oregon hater, not a supporter necessarily, but not a hater. We're going to give people a lot of armor to go to battle with this year. I'm really excited to equip people to be smarter and better sports bettors, and to get more of an insight on people like you and I and kind of what our mentality is, what's our methodology, what's our process. So I'm really excited for a lot of these educational pieces. But as we get closer to the season, mind you, we're going to give some actionable advice, right? We're going to have some plays. We're going to have some real wagers out there that we're going to throw out to people, and we're going to go get the money.
Absolutely. And rumor has it we might put out some season win total information here in the coming weeks and months. So stay tuned. We'll have some stuff coming out, and we'll do some other shows like this. I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate you taking the time. First of all, I know it's midnight here, East Coast time. So thank you for taking the time to spend an hour and 28 minutes here tonight as we break this down. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in too. I mean, the fact that we're now up above 600 win totals. I'm reading the side. This is funny. Can you imagine if I had 600 win totals? It's getting late. Win totals are they going to be on action? I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, so everything I do, and so I've with the success I've had in regular season wins over the years, a lot of people ask about when I'm going to release. I plan to put it out on Twitter the morning before when I'm going to release a play. I'll give people plenty of time to kind of get honed in. I'll throw it out there, post it on all the forums. Everything will be in the Action. I am a writer for the Action Network, and so I do 10 to 12 articles a week for the Action Network. I'm going to also be moving into some video content for them, and they're going to put some podcasts together for me to be able to do there. So I'll take on a little bit more of an emerging role with Action, which I'm thrilled about.
Nice.
Follow me on the Action app, and all of the information that I personally invest in and all the plays will be logged in there in the Action app. So put the notifications on.
All right, very nice. Yeah, what I was saying is over 600 people watching here at this point. 600 win totals would really be something, that's for sure. Steve, thanks for the kind words. Thank you to everybody who chimed in here tonight. A lot more people even chiming in, as we go. Don, thank you again. Yeah, I mean, look, this is kind of the point of everything I do right here. So I'll just, leave this, and I know you feel the same way. I want to speak freely, and I want to be transparent. If things are going poorly, they're going poorly. If they're going well, they're going well. If the process doesn't work in a short sample, it doesn't really mean that it doesn't work long term. People might get upset, things like that. But, to be able to talk about the way we do this, long term, if you're betting right now, you're better off trying to listen to things like this and say, how should I go about trying to get better as a sports bettor than you are listening to the hot free pick. I mean, this is, anybody can win 3 games in a row. Anybody can look like an absolute genius. If you try to figure out more about the process and try to get little nuggets that will help you long term, this is going to make you better than if you just, find some random person on a heater, I guess I would say. So, but I appreciate Josh taking the time to do this here tonight. That's what I always try to do, is to be as transparent as possible and to help people, with things that are not necessarily readily available out there. Not everybody does things like this. So thank you to everybody who tuned in. Josh, thanks for the time tonight. Give him a follow. You said you work working with Action Network. Is there anything else you want to let people know of what's going on with you?
Yeah, Action Network. Again, I'll be doing 10 to 12 articles a week there, plus the other media mediums that I'll be participating in. Active on all the gambling forums that anyone would be a part of. Always on Twitter, so reach out to me there. I love the dialogue. You and I plan to do some collaboration this season again, not only on Twitter with the weekly spaces, but I think you and I have some other things in the works, which I'm thrilled about. And I'll just take a minute too and say, right, this is a tough industry for people who are providing information, and what you do so well with having a service for people and providing valuable plays, but oftentimes there's so many bad apples that give it a bad rap. To find somebody who is doing something the right way, who is extremely meticulous in the documentation, and who is transparent, win or lose, completely accountable to the subscribers and the paying clients, is something that is so critical. If you are out there and you're trying to find an edge and you're willing to pay for picks, I mean, there is no better guy that I've come across. I've been doing this for 18 years. I know everybody. Kyle is absolutely as stand-up as it gets. He puts his time out there. He prepares. He works hard. He's in the trenches, and provides the free educational tools like him and I are doing tonight. I really appreciate this content, and so fully backed by the Duck for sure. I have full confidence in everything you're doing, and just proud to say you're my friend and that I know you. I really appreciate all you do.
Hey, thank you, man. I appreciate that a lot. And Steve, that's not true. Sometimes it feels that way, but this is actually the time of the year where I don't work near as many crazy hours. I can only say that about a couple months. So I got to spend a lot of time, get out there on the baseball diamond with the kids a little bit, have a little bit of fun, a few rounds of golf, some bad golf, things like that. But I appreciate the kind words. I always try to be transparent, and I won't do this forever. It's not the easiest thing to do year round, every single sport, but I tell you what, I always try to put a lot into it while I'm doing it. So we will work together going forward. And I'm looking forward to that. And definitely everybody give him a follow at Step on a Duck One there on social media on X. And we'll let you know when we're going to be going live again. We'll do some of these shows, and then we'll have the Twitter Spaces when the season rolls around, and hopefully some other exciting things to say. But thanks for spending some time with us here tonight. And we'll look forward to talking to you here in future weeks. Hope everybody has a good rest of the month of May, and we'll talk to you here again in a little bit.